There is a specific kind of silence that fills a corporate boardroom right before you are stabbed in the back. It is thick, heavy, and smells faintly of expensive coffee and fresh leather. At 4:30 on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, I sat across from Vice President Carter Rhodes, watching that exact silence settle over the room. Outside the tinted glass, sheets of gray rain slammed against the high-rise windows of Paragon Citadel Solutions, blurring the city skyline. Inside, the atmosphere was even colder. My name is Victoria Frost. At 38 years old, I had spent nearly a decade of my life building this company's technical foundation from the ground up. As the managing director of global accounts and chief infrastructure architect, I didn't just manage clients. I built the actual data logistics engine that kept them alive. I knew every line of custom code, every database fail-safe, and every operational heartbeat of our global network. But none of that mattered to the man sitting across from me. And it certainly didn't matter to the 26-year-old boy sitting directly next to him. That boy was Pierce Rhodes, the vice president's only son. He was fresh out of an elite business school, completely unburdened by a single day of actual, hard corporate labor. He sat there wearing a tailored Italian suit that cost more than my first 3 cars combined, lazily swirling a heavy silver pen between his fingers. He looked at me with a smug smirk that made my skin crawl. Carter cleared his throat, adjusting his heavy gold watch. He wouldn't look me in the eye. Instead, he stared intensely at a glossy black folder on the table. He said, "Victoria, we deeply appreciate everything you have done for the infrastructure of this company. You have been a steady hand. But Paragon Citadel is entering a brand new era. We need to modernize our client-facing leadership to match our future scaling goals. Therefore, effective immediately, we are moving the Vanguard Sovereign account under new management. Pierce will be taking over as the sole lead executive." The words hung heavily in the air. The Vanguard Sovereign account was our company's absolute crown jewel. It was valued at $1.2 billion. It represented over 6% of our total annual revenue. To make things even more critical, the formal contract renewal meeting was scheduled for exactly 9 o'clock the next morning. For 10 long years, I had personally nurtured that account, protecting their massive global data streams from a single second of downtime. I kept my face perfectly still, refusing to show a flicker of shock. My voice remained smooth and calm when I asked, "And what exactly is my role in this new era, Carter?" Pierce chuckled, leaning forward aggressively. He rested his elbows on the mahogany table, breaking all professional distance. He said, "Let's be completely honest, Victoria. Your technical methods are stagnant. You are too focused on the back-end engineering, too old school. The Vanguard account needs a younger, much more aggressive face to drive the renewal home tomorrow morning. We can't have a quiet engineer holding back our presentation. So you aren't being transferred to another team. You are being officially reassigned." Carter slid a piece of paper across the table. I looked down at it. It was a formal demotion letter. My title was being stripped away completely. I was being moved from managing director to an entry-level position called an operational support clerk. It was a low-level data entry role meant for college interns, coming with a 70% pay cut and removing all my executive authority. Pierce smirked even wider, sliding a pen toward me. He said, "We need you to sign this right now, to ensure a smooth transition of power before the morning meeting. If you refuse to sign, the board will consider it an immediate resignation with cause, and you will walk away with nothing, losing all your unvested stock options." They both sat back, waiting for the explosion. They expected me to cry, to scream, or to storm out of the boardroom in a fit of helpless rage. That is what they thought an underestimated woman would do when her life's work was stolen from her. But I didn't give them that satisfaction. I took a slow, shallow breath, keeping my heart rate perfectly controlled. I looked Pierce dead in his arrogant eyes. Then, without saying a single word, I picked up the pen and firmly signed my name at the bottom. I stood up, smoothed down my jacket, and picked up my copy of the paper. "Thank you for the absolute clarity," I said quietly. They thought my silence was weakness. They thought it was total, crushing defeat. They had absolutely no idea that by taking me off the Vanguard account and altering my system clearance, they had just pulled the pin on a massive operational grenade. I walked out of the executive boardroom and moved down the quiet, carpeted hallway toward my personal office. My heels clicked softly against the floor, the only sound cutting through the sudden emptiness of the executive wing. When I reached my desk, I pulled a plain cardboard box out from under the wooden cabinet and began packing my personal belongings. I took down my framed technical certifications, wrapped my desk clock in a piece of packing paper, and stacked my personal project notebooks. As I packed, the muffled sounds of loud laughter and the distinct, sharp pop of a champagne cork echoed from directly across the hallway. I looked out through my glass door. Pierce was already celebrating inside his massive new corner office. A group of junior managers were crowding around him, laughing loudly at his jokes and pouring expensive drinks into crystal glasses. He was celebrating an unearned victory, entirely focused on the massive $15 million personal performance bonus that was legally tied to the successful Vanguard renewal the next morning. He truly thought he had just secured his entire corporate future in a single afternoon. Suddenly, my computer monitor lit up with a rapid string of automated system alerts. I sat down in my chair and looked closely at the screen. Pierce was wasting absolutely no time. Using his newly granted administrative permissions, he was already systematically erasing my existence from the company databases. He completely revoked my executive administrator access to the primary Vanguard communication channels. Then, right before my eyes, I watched the shared network drive refresh. Pierce had deleted my name entirely from the morning's presentation slide deck, replacing it with his own name in giant, bold letters. He wanted me completely gone, and he wanted the board to believe he had managed the billion-dollar account all by himself. But what Pierce failed to realize in his desperate, greedy rush for glory was that he was looking at the company through simple charts and colorful spreadsheets. I was the one who actually knew the living machinery. He treated a highly complex, custom-built global data logistics network like it was a simple retail website that could run itself. By locking me out of the main database dashboard to show his newfound dominance, Pierce didn't just remove my access. He accidentally severed the manual monitoring protocols that I personally ran every single evening. The Paragon Citadel logistics network was simply too massive to be fully automated. It required continuous human oversight to manually balance the data loads across our international shipping lines. My quiet evening intervention was the only thing that kept the entire global system stable and synchronized. I watched the server response times begin to steadily climb on my secondary monitor. A tiny red warning light began to blink aggressively in the bottom corner of the network map. It was the very first fracture in their foundation. Under my management, I would have corrected that database imbalance in less than 30 seconds. But I was no longer the managing director. I was an entry-level operational support clerk, and fixing core system imbalances was far above my new pay grade. I refused to let emotion or anger cloud my judgment. I shut down my laptop, picked up my cardboard box, and walked out of the office. As I passed Pierce's glass door, he caught my eye and raised his champagne glass to me with a mocking smile. I didn't smile back, but I didn't look away either. I walked out of the building and into the pouring rain, knowing that the magnificent corporate tower they were standing on was already beginning to split at the seams. They had built their entire trap out of sheer greed, and now all I had to do was go home and let the night play out exactly as it was meant to. I sat in my car, watching the windshield wipers struggle against the heavy downpour. The dashboard clock read 5:15 p.m. The parking lot of Paragon Citadel Solutions was dark, illuminated only by the dull yellow glow of the streetlights. My cardboard box sat in the passenger seat beside me like a heavy weight. I reached into my bag, pulled out my personal laptop, and turned it on. I did not connect to the company Wi-Fi network. Instead, I used a secure mobile hotspot from my phone. I bypassed all the standard corporate communication channels and opened a deeply encrypted, external hard drive that contained my personal archive of foundational project documents. I scrolled past hundreds of system diagrams until I found the exact document I was looking for. It was the original master service agreement for the Vanguard Sovereign account. Years ago, I had personally negotiated every single line of this contract. I did not deal with low-level account managers or corporate committees. I dealt directly with Marcus Thorne, the brilliant but notoriously brutal billionaire CEO of Vanguard Sovereign. Marcus was a man who grew up working in the harsh international shipping yards, and he carried that exact same ruthlessness into the corporate boardroom. He did not trust giant corporate entities. He did not care about sleek logos or polished sales pitches. Marcus only trusted specific, competent people. He trusted people who actually knew how to fix things when the world was burning. During our very final contract negotiation meeting, Marcus looked at me across the table and said, "Victoria, if you are not the one watching over my data ledger, I do not want your company touching it." Because of that exact conversation, I had quietly and legally inserted Clause 14.2 into the foundational legal framework of the contract. It was called a Key Personnel Continuity Rider. It was a protective clause, but I had written it with absolute surgical precision. The clause explicitly stated that if I, Victoria Frost, was ever removed from active technical oversight or day-to-day management of the Vanguard data ledger, without a signed 90-day transition period, the entire data architecture would instantly change. For strict security reasons, the network would automatically revert to a secure, isolated local node under my sole legal possession. But that was not the deadliest part of the clause. Clause 14.2 also gave Vanguard Sovereign the absolute legal right to terminate the entire contract immediately with zero financial penalties. Even worse for Paragon Citadel, the clause stated that Vanguard could demand a full, immediate refund for the current operational quarter. That meant if the company broke this rider, Paragon Citadel would not only lose their biggest client, but they would also have to pay back tens of millions of dollars they had already spent. Pierce Rhodes had never actually read the 500-page contract. He was a boy who only looked at the target revenue projection on the very last sheet. He assumed that a billion-dollar account ran on a generic cloud network that any intern could manage with the push of a button. He had no idea how deeply my identity was woven into the technology. He did not know that the core servers required my unique digital signature every 12 hours to validate the global shipping ledgers. Without that signature, the system would assume it was under a hostile attack. The countdown to the next validation check was already running in the background. The clock was ticking, and Pierce had just locked out the only person who could stop the system from shutting down. I shifted my car into drive and drove home through the dark, rain-slicked streets of the city. The traffic was slow, but my mind was moving with absolute clarity. When I arrived at my apartment, I sat down at my quiet kitchen table and opened my laptop once again. It was time to begin loading the weapon. A less experienced person would have panicked. They would have called human resources to complain about unfair treatment, or they would have sent an angry, emotional email to the chief executive officer. But I knew that corporate human resources departments do not exist to protect employees. They exist to protect the company from legal liability. An angry email would only give them time to prepare a defense. I refused to give them that advantage. Instead, I crafted a perfectly polite, cold, and professional email addressed directly to the head of human resources. In the email, I formally accepted my new role as an entry-level operational support clerk. I thanked them for the opportunity and attached a clean, scanned copy of the demotion paper I had signed in the boardroom. By doing this, I created an unshakable, legally binding paper trail. This document proved, without a shadow of a doubt, that Paragon Citadel Solutions had willingly and deliberately removed me from my executive duties on the Vanguard account. They could never claim it was an accident or a temporary misunderstanding. They had put it in writing, and now so had I. It was the perfect legal shield. Next, I opened a separate, highly secure communication channel. I did not contact the main office at Vanguard Sovereign. Instead, I sent a brief, encrypted notification directly to Marcus Thorne's personal chief of security. We had worked together closely for years to prevent international cyber attacks, and he knew my technical voice perfectly. He was a man who didn't care about corporate politics. He only cared about system integrity. The message I sent was completely devoid of emotion. I wrote, "Please be advised that due to an internal corporate restructuring at Paragon Citadel Solutions, I have been officially reassigned to low-level data entry. Effective immediately, I no longer possess the administrative clearance or technical oversight required to manage your accounts. As a result, I can no longer personally guarantee the security, stability, or validation of Vanguard's 6 a.m. daily global data sync. I did not ask Marcus Thorne to cancel his contract with us. I did not complain about Vice President Carter Rhodes, and I did not badmouth his arrogant son, Pierce. I simply stated the cold, hard operational facts. I knew exactly how Marcus Thorne operated. He was a billionaire because he valued risk management above absolutely everything else. To him, an unvalidated data sync was not just a technical glitch. It was a massive financial threat that could freeze his cargo ships and cost him millions of dollars every single hour. After hitting the send button, I closed my laptop. I walked over to the counter, poured myself a glass of cold water, and stood by the window watching the rain slide down the glass. The trap was fully set. The beauty of this entire strategy was that I did not have to lift another finger. I did not have to sabotage the network, and I did not have to break any laws. Pierce's own unearned arrogance and complete ignorance of the contract would do all the heavy lifting for me. He wanted the glory of managing a $1.2 billion account, but he had no idea that he was stepping onto a stage that was completely rigged for his own destruction. I took a sip of my water, checked my watch, and waited for the morning to come. At exactly 2 a.m., my personal laptop chimed quietly on my nightstand. I wasn't asleep. When you spend 10 years protecting a global infrastructure, your internal clock automatically adjusts to system schedules. I sat up, pulled the laptop onto my lap, and opened the public-facing server status map that I had designed for Vanguard Sovereign. Even though Pierce had completely blocked my internal admin accounts, he couldn't block me from viewing the global network health indicators. What I saw on the screen made me lean forward. The system wasn't just experiencing a minor lag. It was lighting up in a cascade of bright amber and flashing crimson. Pierce Rhodes had decided to show the corporate board exactly how efficient he could be. Driven by pure desperation to prove that my 10 years of technical work could be easily upgraded by a 26-year-old. With a fresh degree, he had attempted a midnight stunt. He wanted to present a completed automated cloud migration of Vanguard's entire global logistics ledger as a massive surprise achievement during the 9 a.m. boardroom renewal meeting. He wanted to stand before the chief executive officer and take full credit for modernizing the entire company overnight. But Pierce did not understand the underlying architecture. Because my unique digital validation signature was missing from the network due to my sudden demotion, the automated fail-safe system did not recognize the massive data shift. To the core security servers, this sudden, unauthorized movement of data looked like a highly coordinated, hostile external cyber attack. The system did exactly what I had programmed it to do under a worst-case scenario. It initiated an immediate rolling security blackout across the entire logistics framework to lock down and protect the integrity of Vanguard's data. Right at that moment, in his expensive home office, warning flags and red error messages must have started exploding across Pierce's screen. A real engineer would have stopped immediately. A competent professional would have swallowed their pride, halted the process, and called the infrastructure team. But Pierce's sheer arrogance completely blinded him. He truly believed the system was just an outdated, clunky legacy network that was resisting his superior methods. Instead of stopping, he used his newly granted Master Administrator credentials to manually override the automated security protocols. He forced the system to bypass the safety locks. By doing that, he committed corporate suicide. The override completely shattered the synchronization link, locking Vanguard Sovereign completely out of their own international shipping grid. With one arrogant click of a button, Pierce froze hundreds of millions of dollars in live cargo movements across 3 different continents. Cargo ships in Asia could not unload, delivery trucks in Europe were stranded at checkpoints, and distribution centers in North America were suddenly completely blind. He had completely broken the system, foolishly thinking he was fixing it, and the digital paper trail was recording every single key press. The sun had not even begun to rise when the heavy silence of my apartment was shattered. It was exactly 5:30 a.m. My phone began vibrating violently on my wooden nightstand, the bright screen illuminating the dark room. I looked down at the caller ID. The name Pierce Rhodes was flashing across the glass. I didn't move a muscle. I simply sat there in the quiet room, watching the phone spin on the table until the call went straight to voicemail. 10 seconds later, the phone began vibrating again. Pierce was calling back immediately. This time, I calmly slid my finger across the screen, placed the phone to my ear, and answered with a smooth, perfectly relaxed voice. "This is Victoria," I said quietly. Pierce did not say good morning. He was completely breathless, and his voice was cracking with pure, unadulterated panic. The arrogant boy from the boardroom was completely gone. In his place was a terrified child who realized he was drowning. He began screaming into the receiver, his words tumbling over one another. He told me that Vanguard's global logistics hubs were completely blind. He shouted that their international shipping terminals couldn't load any cargo, their tracking maps were totally blank, and his executive dashboard was showing nothing but critical, fatal errors. He ordered me to log into the network immediately from my home computer and fix the glitch before the board members arrived for the morning meeting. I kept my breathing perfectly shallow, keeping my voice completely professional and level. "Pierce," I replied smoothly. As an entry-level operational support clerk, my master administrator access was fully revoked by you at 4:30 yesterday afternoon. You explicitly deleted my name from the system registry. I no longer possess the legal or technical authority to touch the Vanguard network architecture. Attempting to bypass those restrictions would be a direct violation of company policy. Pierce completely lost his mind. He began to openly threaten me, his voice echoing loudly through the speaker. He swore that if I didn't log in and fix this system error right this second, he would make absolutely sure that I was fired without a single penny, that my reputation was completely ruined, and that I would never work in the technology industry ever again. I let him finish his tirade. I let the silence hang in the air for 3 long seconds before I spoke. "Pierce," I said, my voice dropping to a cold, razor-sharp whisper. "I think you should know that this call is currently being recorded on my personal line for quality assurance purposes. I highly suggest you save your breath for the presentation. Good luck with the 9 o'clock meeting." Without waiting for a response, I pressed the red button and hung up the phone. I turned the device completely on silent, laid my head back down on the pillow, and closed my eyes. The countdown was almost over, and the executive suite at Paragon Citadel Solutions was about to experience a beautiful, devastating morning. At 8:45 a.m., I walked through the heavy glass doors of the Paragon Citadel headquarters. The morning light was pale, filtering through the massive glass atrium, but the atmosphere inside the building was pitch black. The moment I stepped onto the executive floor, I could practically smell the sheer panic in the air. People were running down hallways with stacks of papers, whispering frantically in small groups, and staring wide-eyed at their computer screens. The corporate ship was sinking, and everyone knew it. I stood completely calm, dressed in an immaculate, sharply tailored charcoal suit with a crisp white shirt beneath it. I held nothing but a small leather portfolio under my arm. I looked exactly like an executive, even though my official title on the HR registry was now a low-level clerk. I walked toward the main corporate boardroom. Through the clear glass walls, I could see that the massive room was already completely packed. The stakes could not have been any higher. The chief executive officer of Paragon Citadel sat at the head of the long mahogany table, his face completely pale and covered in a thin sheet of sweat. Next to him was Vice President Carter Rhodes, adjusting his collar repeatedly, looking like a man awaiting a death sentence. And beside Carter sat Pierce. The arrogant 26-year-old looked physically so bad. The smug smirk from yesterday afternoon had vanished completely. His expensive Italian suit was wrinkled, his hair was messy, and his hands were shaking so violently that he could barely hold his pen. Sitting directly across from them was Marcus Thorne, the billionaire CEO of Vanguard Sovereign. He sat perfectly still, his massive arms crossed tightly over his chest, his face looking like it had been carved out of solid stone. He didn't look at the sleek presentation slides that Pierce had spent all night preparing. He didn't look at the colorful revenue charts projecting future growth. Flanking Marcus were 4 corporate lawyers dressed in dark suits. They sat in absolute silence, looking exactly like a pack of sharks waiting for the command to tear their prey apart. I opened the heavy wooden door and stepped into the room. The moment I entered, Carter Rhodes snapped his head toward me, his face flushed with deep embarrassment and anger. He pointed a trembling finger toward the back of the room and said in a sharp, harsh whisper, "Victoria, what are you doing in here? This meeting is strictly for high-level company executives. Go sit in the back corner by the door and keep your mouth shut. We will deal with your technical errors after we finish the renewal." Before I could even take a single step, the entire energy of the room shifted completely. Marcus Thorne stood up from his chair. He didn't even glance at Carter. He looked directly past this president, locked his piercing eyes onto mine, and spoke with a deep, booming voice that echoed off the boardroom walls. "Good morning, Victoria," he said clearly. The room fell into a dead, suffocating silence. The Paragon CEO looked completely bewildered. Marcus Thorne didn't wait for anyone else to speak. He reached out his hand, and his lead lawyer immediately opened a thick leather briefcase. The lawyer pulled out a formal 20-page legal document and dropped it directly onto the center of the glass table with a loud, heavy thud. "Vanguard Sovereign is not renewing our infrastructure contract with Paragon Citadel Solutions," Marcus announced, his voice completely devoid of any warmth. "In fact, we are executing an immediate total termination of our existing agreement, effective right now." Pierce scrambled forward, knocking his silver pen onto the floor. His voice cracked with pure terror as he stammered, "Mr. Thorne, please, you can't do this. The contract renewal is worth $1.2 billion. The minor technical glitch we experienced this morning was just a temporary issue. It was caused entirely by Victoria's outdated infrastructure. I am personally modernizing the network right now, and everything will be completely functional by noon." Marcus Thorne cut him off with a look so cold it could have frozen water. "Shut your mouth, boy," Marcus said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous rumble that filled the boardroom like thunder. "You think I am an idiot? You think I don't know who actually built the system that runs my global empire?" Marcus pulled out a copy of my email to his security officer, alongside Clause 14.2 of our agreement. He slammed them down. "Your company committed a catastrophic breach by demoting Victoria, violating our key personnel rider, and endangering our entire billion-dollar supply chain. Vanguard does not do business with arrogant children. We do business with Victoria Frost. We are officially done with you. There is absolutely no further room for negotiation." The fallout inside the room was immediate and total. The chief executive officer of Paragon Citadel turned on Carter and Pierce with a raw fury that literally shook the walls. The CEO's face went from pale to a dark, angry purple as he slammed his fists onto the table, shouting at the top of his lungs. Within 10 chaotic minutes, the entire power structure of the executive wing was permanently dismantled. Carter Rhodes was instantly stripped of his vice presidency, and Pierce was summarily fired on the spot for gross professional negligence and causing catastrophic financial damage to the firm. The CEO didn't even let them go back to their desks. 2 heavy security guards were called up to the top floor, and they escorted both men completely out of the building. As they walked down the main corridor, Pierce was forced to carry his personal belongings in a small plastic container that looked much smaller and more pathetic than the cardboard box I had packed the night before. The moment the heavy wooden doors clicked shut behind them, the absolute silence returned to the boardroom. The CEO turned slowly to face me, his hands visibly trembling as he wiped the cold sweat from his forehead. He looked like a man staring directly into a financial abyss. He openly began to beg me, his voice cracking with deep desperation as he pleaded with me to salvage the relationship with Vanguard Sovereign and save the entire company from immediate bankruptcy. He knew that without me, the firm would completely collapse before sunset. I stood up smoothly from my chair at the back of the room, walked slowly to the center of the glass table, and stood directly across from him. I didn't smile, and I didn't lose my cold composure. I stated my terms clearly, using a tone that left absolutely zero room for argument. "I will fix the infrastructure, and I will restore the network," I said calmly. "But I will only do it under my own strict conditions. First, I want Carter's vacant position as the Executive Vice President of Global Operations. Second, I demand a permanent voting seat on the company's board of directors. Third, I want a substantial equity stake in this firm, fully vested starting today. And finally, I require that Pierce's former corner office be completely gutted by tonight and turned into a simple archival storage closet." The CEO didn't hesitate for even half a second. He grabbed a heavy black pen and signed the formal corporate authorization papers right there on the glass table, without a single objection or delay. He knew he had absolutely no choice left. I turned my head toward Marcus Thorne, giving him a slight, respectful nod. I reached into my leather portfolio, pulled out a small, encrypted backup flash drive containing the secure local node keys, and slid it smoothly across the mahogany table. Marcus took the drive, a small smile finally breaking across his rugged face. He knew his massive global logistics framework was fully protected once more. The $2 billion contract was officially resigned and fully executed within the hour under my sole command. The global data network was completely restored, and the international shipping lanes were running smoothly once again. Later that afternoon, I stood silently by the massive floor-to-ceiling high-rise window of my brand-new executive office, looking out at the sprawling city below as the storm clouds finally began to clear. I took a slow, quiet sip of my hot coffee, fully realizing that in the harsh modern corporate world, absolute silence and flawless documentation are the absolute deadliest weapons anyone can ever carry. My greedy enemies had tried their best to completely erase my existence from this firm, but their own blinding arrogance had ultimately paved the definitive path to my absolute and permanent victory. Justice had been beautifully served.